Hello, everybody. How you doing? I'm laughing because this next artist is a mouthful. He was born in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Yeah, I know the town very well. Kind of North Jersey kind of place, you know what I mean? And he was named Joseph Anthony Jacoby Passalaqua. Yeah, Joseph Anthony Jacoby Passalaqua. His friends and the rest of the world is like, let's just call this cat Joe Pass. And that's how you know him, Joe Pass, the great guitarist. Well, he had, regular little life out there in the country in New Brunswick, and then I guess the family moved even further west into Pennsylvania, some little small town in Pennsylvania. But he stayed close enough to Jersey. By 14, he's gigging. He started playing guitar at an early age, and by 14, he was starting to gig, man. At a very young age, he's playing with some major bands, even the great Charlie Barnett. And this whole time, while he's playing with these groups and doing what he's doing at this young age, he's practicing his butt off. He's hanging out with all the cats. He's learning the ropes. He's learning all the techniques. He's learning all the tricks of the trade. He's getting it all down. Yes, he is. And, he starts touring more and more and more with small groups. And before you know it, the way it goes is you end up in New York. Well, you country boy. Although it's New Jersey, it's country in New Jersey, trust me. There's country folks in New Jersey, and most certainly in Pennsylvania. Yeah, you can tell by their politics. They're definitely country people in Pennsylvania. Anyway, sorry about that. Joe ends up in New York, and he's on the jazz scene, which he was not ready for. And before you know it, he has an addiction to the horse. H. Heroin, that bad boy. Oh yeah. So he's in trouble now, because now every penny he can make, he's trying to put into his arm. And things got bad, must have got real hot for him around New York. And so all of a sudden he gets the heck out of New York and he goes south. Unfortunately, his choices weren't much better, because he ends up in New Orleans, another sin city, maybe the ultimate sin city. And so he ends up in New York, a junkie, and then tries to escape, probably because he couldn't pay his debts, and moves to New Orleans, and gets a gig playing in little clubs, little bebop guitar licks with a little band and whatnot behind strippers. That's right, he's playing in strip clubs. He figured he could hide out in there and no one would know he was there, and he could make the money and take care of his stuff. And he said he almost had a nervous breakdown in New Orleans, because what he did not realize about New Orleans was every drug they had in New York, they had in New Orleans and more. So he almost lost his mind there, and he thought he was having a breakdown, probably was. So he left there and couldn't stop what he was doing. So as the 50s approached him, of course he's a young man in his early 20s by this time, he finds himself in and out of prison for drug offenses and drug-related offenses. Who knows? Robbery, stealing, I don't know, whatever. But he's in and out of jail for about 10 years. And during this time, of course, he's not playing a whole lot of guitar. Okay, he pretty much gave up music for that entire 10-year period. During the 60s, somehow, he ends up in California and becomes a resident at the Synanon community, which is a rehabilitation community, rehabilitation center. And although they were quite controversial, they were one of the earlier centers to really deal forthrightly with drug addiction. And after 2 years, 2.5 years, he was cleaned up pretty well. And he decided that New Orleans wasn't the place to be, and New York wasn't the place to be, so he stayed in California. And he picked up his guitar again. And he started playing little gigs here and there again. And before you know it, he's doing commercials and jingles and doing some TV spots, soundtracks, because he's an accomplished musician. And as he stayed clean and his chops came back and his appreciation for life came back, he became this fantastic guitarist that everybody was talking about. So a company called Pacific Jazz. Why Pacific Jazz? Because they're based in California on the Pacific. That's why they signed him. So now he's starting to appear as a soloist and on albums by Gerald Wilson and his big band and some of his small stuff, and Les Pecan, a great keyboard player who became very, very popular in the 70s, and a few others. He even toured the country. He finally got brave enough to leave California and tour with George Shearing. Now, George Shearing, was probably pretty safe. It's like a pretty sterile environment there for him. So he did that for a while. And somehow he caught the attention of two very important people that I mentioned in my talk about Toshiko Akiyoshi, and that is Oscar Peterson and Norm Granz, who did the Jazz Philharmonic. Norm had several recording labels, including Verve and Pablo. And in 1973, he signed Joe to Pablo. And in 1974, they released the very first Pablo album. It is called Virtuoso. Now, if you're a guitar player and you want to be taken to school real fast, go out and get that 1974 album, Virtuoso, because it is aptly titled. And there's a solo guitar performance of a tune called How High the Moon. I listened to it very early this morning, and I was laughing and screaming out loud. This guy was outrageous. He did everything a guitar is supposed to do and a whole lot of things that no other guitar players want to think about doing. And it's all in great musical taste. His personality is coming through. His sense of humor is coming through. His flawless technique is coming through. His impeccable taste is coming through. His creativity is coming through. He is truly a virtuoso. And this was the first release on Pablo. Norm Granz, man, he just knows how to pick them. He's the greatest impresario in the history of jazz. The greatest ever. Now, Oscar, of course, was discovered and nurtured by Norm. And it's not long before they decide that they're going to put Oscar and Joe together. And they bring along Niels Henning Alsted Peterson on bass. And they do an album that is simply called The Trio. Yeah, that's all they got to say. The Trio. There's three freaking outrageous players playing together. So much so that in the year that the album was released, it won a Grammy. I'm figuring 77 or so, for the best jazz performance by a group. Joe is on solid ground. Now, the good thing about Norm is he knows everybody, and everybody owes him because he pretty much nurtured everybody, discovered everybody, supported everybody, paid their rent, bought their meals, whatever he had to do to get them to the finish line. So pretty soon, Joe's playing with Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong, Bud Shank, Zoot Sims, you name it, Dizzy Gillespie, all the biggies got to have a piece of Joe. And some of the most amazing pairings that are done are those wonderful Ella Fitzgerald albums in the very last years of her life. He did 6 in a row, right up until the end of her life. You may know that Oscar Peterson's bass player was Ella's husband for a very, very long time, his longtime bass player. So there was always this family thing going on there as well. Joe continued to have a great career, playing with everybody, making some of the most outstanding recordings, touring. Everything is going well. And then in 1992, he's preparing for a world tour, and he gets sick, and it is discovered that he has liver cancer. And it's not the one that you live with. And it took him down and made him very unhealthy really, really quick. By 1993, it's obvious to everybody that Joe has some serious issues. And in 1994, he played a small club with another guitarist, friend of his. And after the gig, he looks at the guy and he says, and they said he had tears in his eyes when he said it. He says, "I can't play anymore." And his friend looked at him and he said it was like someone took a knife and stabbed him in the heart. Because Joe was so beloved. He'd been through so much. He had survived so much. And yet his spirit and his demeanor and his personality remained so balanced, so open, so happy, so cheerful, so warm. And this is the way it is. And so later, in 1994, Joe went on to higher ground. So let's just take a look at it. Here's a guy that's playing professionally at 14 with some of the biggest names. Here's a guy that's country boy, don't know very much, starts to touring, gets with the wrong people, gets some bad addictions, has to run here, has to run there. In and out of prison for 10 years. Most people don't survive that. Escapes, goes to Synanon for 2.5 years, 2.5 years to break a habit. And then comes out and plays it safe. California, baby. Doing TV and radio and commercials, staying away from that hot jazz scene. Starts to tour, gets recognized, restarts his career, and immediately becomes the virtuoso. The virtuoso. Get that album. And 20 years later, he's gone to higher ground. This is a man that left us beautiful music. Okay? He left us the roadmap to jazz guitar. I don't think you can find a better model of what can be done with jazz guitar, whether it's electric or acoustic, than the work of Joe Pass. And in every situation, with small instrumental combos, with small trios, there's rhythm sections, solo guitar, duet guitar, accompanying singers. Oh yeah, I didn't mention playing with big bands such as Gerald Wilson out in California, and then later playing with Duke Ellington and Count Basie. What do you think it was like for Count Basie to replace Freddie Green, his longtime guitar player, with Joe Pass? Joe Pass had respect for that tradition, and he fit there just right. So this man loved life, or he would not have survived all that he did. And he loved this music, or he would not have left the legacy he left for all of us to enjoy today and tomorrow. Joseph Anthony Passalaqua. Oh, don't forget Jacoby. Joe Anthony Jacoby Passalaqua, better known as Joe Pass. He has passed away, but his music will live forever. Thank you.